The world narrowed to the smell of old leather and lemon polish, a scent that had always meant my father. But now the man sitting in his chair behind his desk was Victor Hale. He didn't belong there. The afternoon sun streamed through the large window behind him, casting his face in shadow, but I could see the cold certainty in his eyes. He leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate, each word a carefully placed nail in a coffin. "Alex," he said, with a false sense of pity that made my skin crawl. "This is difficult to say, but you don't belong here anymore." The air in the room vanished. I felt a physical pressure in my chest, as if I'd been punched. This was the office where I'd built Lego castles on the floor while my dad, James, worked late. This was the desk where he'd taught me how to read a blueprint, his large, calloused finger tracing the lines of future buildings. Now, his oldest friend, the man who had stood by his graveside with tears in his eyes, was claiming it all for himself. The framed photo of my parents and me, taken on a long-ago summer vacation, was now a prop on Victor's desk. I stared at it, unable to look at him, my throat tight with a pain so profound it was beyond tears. I finally forced my gaze to meet his. I saw no regret, only a calculated assessment. He was testing me, waiting for the explosion of grief or anger he could use to label me as unstable, emotional, unfit. A hot wave of fury rose in me, so potent I could taste it metallic and sharp. But I clamped down on it. I let none of it show on my face. I kept my expression a blank mask, my hands steady at my sides. The silence stretched, becoming a weapon I used against him. He shifted in the chair, uncomfortable with my lack of reaction. "It's for the good of the company," he added, his voice losing some of its smooth confidence. I simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. I turned and walked out of the office, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, a quiet end to a brutal chapter. In that moment, I understood that loyalty was a currency Victor had never valued. But I didn't fight back that day. I waited. And I promised myself that when the time came, I would make him wish he had never, ever said those words. Driving away from the office, the numbness began to wear off, replaced by a shaking, all-consuming rage. I pulled my car over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed in the confined space. This wasn't just about a job or a title. It was about my father's legacy. Hale Construction wasn't just a business. It was my father's lifeblood, his name etched on the building, his sweat and soul in every project. He had built it from a single truck and a dream into a respected name. After the heart attack that took him too soon, Victor had been our rock. He'd handled the funeral arrangements, spoken with such eloquence about my father's character, and stood by my mother, Helen, offering a steadying arm. I remembered him in our living room, his voice soft and reassuring. "Helen, Alex, I promise you," he had said, his hand on my shoulder, "I will protect James's company. I'll keep it safe and strong until Alex is ready to lead." It's what James would have wanted. My mother, her eyes red raw from crying, had believed him completely. She saw him as a guardian, a bridge to the past. I, lost in a fog of grief, had clung to his promises like a life raft. Now I saw the truth. He had seen our grief not as a wound to be healed, but as a weakness to be exploited. While we were planning the memorial service, he was planning his takeover. While I was sorting through my father's personal effects, Victor was sorting through company shares, moving pieces on a chessboard only he could see. The new direction he'd started talking about wasn't about innovation. It was about erasing my father's compassionate, people-first philosophy and replacing it with a cold, profit-driven machine. What I had experienced today in that office wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of a long, silent war I hadn't even known I was fighting. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you have to understand who we were. My name is Alex. My father was James Miller, a man who believed a handshake was as binding as a contract. He started Miller Construction with little more than a beat-up pickup truck, a strong back, and an unwavering belief in doing what was right. He wasn't just building houses. He was building homes for families, communities. Victor Hale came into the picture about 15 years ago. He was charismatic, brilliant with numbers, and possessed a silver tongue that could charm the toughest clients. Dad was the heart and the vision. Victor was the smooth-talking engine that helped us grow. They were a perfect team, or so I'd always thought. My childhood was filled with the sounds of construction sites and the smell of sawdust. I loved visiting the office, watching my dad work. He let me sit at a spare desk with my coloring books, telling me one day all of this would be mine to care for. It was never about the money for him. It was about the legacy. When he died so suddenly, the world stopped making sense. The company was the last tangible piece of him I had left. Victor knew that. Take your time, Alex, he'd told me after the funeral. Grieve. Be with your mother. The company will be here. I'll keep the seat warm for you. So after a few months, I joined. I didn't demand a fancy title. I started in project coordination, wanting to learn the business from the ground up, just as my father would have wanted. But from day one, things fell off. The office, once a warm, bustling place, felt cold and silent. The employees who had known me since I was a kid now offered tight, nervous smiles before quickly looking away. Victor assigned me to minor, almost trivial tasks, reviewing outdated inventory lists, organizing filing cabinets. He called it building a foundation. I called it being sidelined. My only ally was Maya, my father's former executive assistant, whom Victor had reassigned to me. She was a quiet, observant woman in her 40s who had been fiercely loyal to my dad. She'd bring me coffee, and sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with a sad, knowing expression in her eyes. I told myself repeatedly that Victor was just being cautious, that he was protecting my father's company from my inexperience. The painful, ugly truth that he was systematically stealing it was something I wasn't yet ready to face. The subtle disrespect became a daily routine. I'd suggest a more efficient way to handle supplier communications, and Victor would pat my shoulder. Good thinking, Alex. Let's table that for now and let the experienced hands manage it. I'd spend hours researching a new, eco-friendly building material, excited to present the cost-saving long-term benefits, and he'd glance at the report and set it aside. Not really our brand, son. The word son started to feel like an insult, a constant reminder that he saw me as a child. I decided to go bigger. I remember my dad's passion project, a proposal for a sustainable, affordable housing community called Havenbrook. He'd spent years acquiring the land and drafting initial plans. He believed companies had a responsibility to give back, to build not just for profit, but for people. To me, completing Havenbrook was the ultimate way to honor him. I spent weeks buried in his old notes, updating the financials, and creating a full presentation. I brought the idea to Victor during one of our weekly check-ins. His reaction was a dismissive wave of his hand. Alex, that was your father's pipe dream, he said with a condescending chuckle. A lovely thought, but we're in the business of building for profit, not for charity. Let's focus on the high-rise downtown. That's where the real money is. I felt like a ghost wandering the halls of my own future. The company was shedding my father's identity, and I was powerless to stop it. The culture was changing. Talk around the water cooler was no longer about quality craftsmanship or happy clients. It was solely about bottom lines and quarterly bonuses. Maya was my only touchstone to the way things were. One afternoon, she came into my small, windowless office and closed the door. He's moving money, Alex, she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I've seen invoices for projects that don't exist. The numbers in the reports he gives the board, they don't match the internal accounts. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My fear was being given a voice. I had been telling myself a comforting lie. Victor wasn't just erasing my father's legacy. He was looting it. The first open, undeniable act of disrespect happened at the quarterly board meeting. I had managed to get a slot on the agenda, thanks to a sympathetic board member who had known my dad. I was nervous, my palms slick with sweat, but I was also more determined than I had ever been. This was for my father. I stood before the board, a presentation on the screen. I talked about Havenbrook, about my father's vision, about how it wasn't just charity, it was smart business that would generate incredible community goodwill and secure government grants. I was halfway through, hitting my stride, when Victor cleared his throat loudly. Alex, he said, a patronizing smile on his face. He didn't even look at me. He addressed the board. That's a very cute idea. It truly is. It reminds me of James, God rest his soul, always thinking with his heart. He paused, letting the condescension hang in the air. But we are not running a charity here. We have shareholders to answer to. A few of the newer board members, men Victor had brought on, chuckled softly. The sound was like a physical slap. My face burned with a humiliation so intense I felt dizzy. I forced my lips into a tight, strained smile and took my seat, my presentation unfinished, my father's dream mocked. After the meeting, as people filed out, Victor cornered me near the coffee station. You have to understand your place here. Alex, he said, his voice low but firm. You are here because of your last name. That's all. It opens doors. But don't confuse that privilege with having the experience to walk through them. I just stared at him, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The worst was yet to come. Later, needing some air, I stepped out onto the patio. Through the slightly open window of the adjacent conference room, I heard Victor's voice. He was talking to the head of finance. He's just sentimental, like his father was, Victor said with a dismissive sigh. That's why I'm in charge now. To make the tough, practical decisions. I stood there, frozen, the words shredding the last of my illusions. I had kept telling myself he was protecting my father's legacy. I finally accepted the devastating truth. He was rewriting it, and he was editing me out of the story. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly for hours, the echo of Victor's words playing on a loop in my head. Asterisk sentimental. Cute. Your last name. Asterisk the humiliation curdled into a solid, simmering rage. He hadn't just insulted me. He had insulted my father's memory, reducing his compassion to a weakness. I ended up back at the empty office building, the night sky dark above me. Using my key card, I slipped inside, the silence feeling heavy and accusing. I went straight to my computer. I was done being the grateful, grieving son. It was time to look for answers. I started with the project management software, cross-referencing project IDs with budget allocations. Then I moved to the server, looking through old financial folders. It was slow, tedious work, and I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Around midnight, I heard a soft click. My door opened, and Maya stood there, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. I saw the light on your system from my login at home, she said softly. She placed a mug on my desk. You're looking for it, aren't you? The proof. I looked at her, my exhaustion and frustration laid bare. I finally nodded. Her face grew serious. I've tried to ignore it for months, she confessed. But the signs are everywhere. Unexplained wire transfers to vendor accounts I've never heard of. Budget overruns on projects that were completed under budget. He's clever, Alex. He's hiding it in plain sight. With Maya's help, my solitary, desperate search transformed into a focused investigation. She knew the accounting systems inside and out, knew where the digital bodies were buried. We became partners, a secret team operating in the shadows, united by our loyalty to my father and a growing determination to expose the rot at the core of his company. Our investigation became a nightly ritual. After the office emptied out, Maya and I would work, our only light the glow from our computer monitors. She taught me how to trace payments, how to identify shell companies, businesses that existed only on paper. It was like trying to solve a massive, malicious puzzle. Victor was devious. He hadn't made one big, stupid mistake. He had created a complex web of small, seemingly legitimate transactions that, when followed, all led back to him. We discovered a company called Apex Supply Company that was billing Miller Construction for materials at wildly inflated prices. Apex had no website, no listed phone number, and its address was a virtual office. Digging deeper, we found that Apex was owned by another company, VH Holdings. The initials were not a subtle coincidence. VH Holdings was the recipient of millions of dollars that should have been Miller Construction's profit. He was paying himself through his own fake company with the company's money. It was breathtaking in its audacity. But the financial theft was only part of it. Maya, with her access to the corporate records, found something even more insidious. She pulled up the company's original operating agreement, a document my father had written with a handshake mentality. Buried in the clauses about board composition and voting rights, Victor had, over the years, added small, almost unnoticeable amendments. These changes gradually shifted the balance of power. In the event of my father's death, instead of his shares passing directly to me, their voting power was temporarily ceded to the board for a transitional period. And Victor, as the managing partner, controlled the board. He hadn't just been stealing money. He had been quietly stealing legal control, preparing to push me out with the cold, hard language of a contract. He was making his theft official, armed with a folder full of printouts, bank statements, corporate registrations for the shell companies, the amended operating agreement. I decided to confront him. I thought the evidence would be enough to shock him into backing down. It was a naive mistake, born of a belief that people, when faced with their own corruption, feel shame. I walked into his office without knocking and laid the folder on his desk. "Explain this, Victor," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my effort to control it. He didn't even open the folder. He looked from the papers to my face, and a slow, condescending smirk spread across his lips. He leaned back in my father's leather chair, steepling his fingers. "You think you own this company, Alex?" he asked, his tone dangerously soft. "You are a child playing detective. Look at the paperwork your own father signed." He tapped a finger on the amended agreement. He left the management of this company to the board's discretion. And guess who the board listens to? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Me. They listen to me. Not to his grieving, sentimental son who doesn't know a balance sheet from a coloring book. He stood up, circling the desk to stand uncomfortably close to me. "You're being paranoid. You're grieving, and it's clouding your judgment. These shell companies you found are standard international suppliers. The amendments? Legal necessities to protect the company from exactly this kind of emotional, unstable reaction." He was gaslighting me, using my grief as a weapon. He made me feel small, foolish, and hysterical. He was so confident, so utterly in control, that for a moment I doubted my own findings. That was his greatest power, not just his position, but his ability to make you question your own reality. I left his office feeling smaller and more defeated than when I had entered. The retaliation was swift and brutal. A week after my failed confrontation, Victor called a surprise board reorganization meeting. I was not on the invite list. Maya texted me frantically. "Emergency board meeting right now. They're voting on executive positions. Get here." I drove to the office like a man possessed, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I arrived, the meeting was just breaking up. The board members, men and women I had known since childhood, filed out of the conference room. They couldn't meet my eyes. They looked at the floor, at their phones, anywhere but at me. Victor emerged last, a look of somber triumph on his face. "Alex," he said, as if my presence was a mild inconvenience. "The board has made some difficult but necessary decisions to streamline our leadership. We're eliminating redundant positions to improve efficiency. I'm afraid your role has been made redundant." The word echoed in the hall. Redundant. I was a redundant part of my own father's machine. Stunned, I walked to my office. My few personal items, a photo of my parents, a pin my dad had given me, felt like artifact from another life. I put them in a small cardboard box. Victor followed me and stood in the doorway, watching me pack. He walked me all the way to the elevator, playing the part of the compassionate executioner. As the elevator doors dinged open, he placed a hand on my shoulder. I flinched. "Take care, kid," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe one day, when you're older, you'll understand how business really works." The doors slid shut, closing on his smug, victorious face. The box in my hands felt like it contained the shattered pieces of my future. I don't remember the drive home. I walked into my dark, silent apartment and placed the cardboard box on the kitchen table. Then I slid down the wall onto the floor, the full weight of my failure crashing down on me. I had lost. I had let my father down. I had let my mother down. Victor had outmaneuvered me at every turn. He was smarter, more connected, and utterly ruthless. I sat there for hours as the sky outside turned from dusk to deep night, wallowing in a pit of despair so deep I couldn't see a way out. In the depths of my self-pity, a memory surfaced. My father, in his study at home, tinkering with an old, heavy safe he kept in the corner. He called it his just-in-case box. He was a man who believed in trust, but he also believed in being prepared. Always have a backup plan, Alex, he told me once, a twinkle in his eye. Even for your backup plan. I hadn't thought about that safe in years. A tiny, desperate spark of hope flickered to life in my chest. I pulled myself off the floor, grabbed my car keys, and drove to my mother's house. She was already in bed. I went straight to his study. It was exactly as he'd left it, the air still faintly smelling of his cigarillos and old books. The safe was there, in the corner, covered by a stack of architectural magazines. My hand shook as I spun the dial. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried my parents' anniversary. Nothing. I tried the date the company was founded. The heavy door didn't budge. I was about to give up when I remembered his favorite saying, the one he lived by, build with honor. I typed in the letters BUILDHONOR. With a solid, satisfying clunk, the safe door unlocked. Inside, amidst a few old passports and insurance documents, was a small, silver USB drive. On it, in my father's familiar, slanted handwriting, was a label, for Alex, if anything happens. My heart began to pound like a drum. I rushed back to my apartment, the USB drive clutched tightly in my hand. It felt like I was holding my father's last message, a message he had known he might need to send. I plugged it into my laptop. A password prompt appeared. I tried the same combination I'd used for the safe, build within. The screen unlocked, and a single folder appeared, named Legacy. I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. It was everything. It was more than Maya and I had ever found. My father hadn't just suspected Victor. He had been building a case against him. There were folders within folders. Financial discrepancies contained spreadsheets tracking every suspicious payment, with notes in my dad's terse style, payment to Apex, no matching delivery receipt. VH Holdings trace ownership. There was a folder called Amended Agreements with the original documents side by side with the ones Victor had altered, my father's comment highlighted in yellow. This clause was changed without my knowledge or consent. The most damning folder was called Communications. It contained scanned copies of emails between Victor and a lawyer discussing how to legally dilute my inheritance. There were even voice recording files. With trembling fingers, I clicked one. My father's voice, tired and resigned, filled the room. Victor, I know what you're doing. The Apex invoices are a sham. I'm giving you one chance to make this right. Then Victor's voice, smooth as ever, but with a new, cold edge. James, you're not well. You're imagining things. You should focus on your health. The recording ended. I sat back, tears finally streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage, of vindication. My father hadn't just left me a company. He had left me the weapons to save it. I called Maya immediately. We met at a 24-hour diner far from the office, in a vinyl booth that offered privacy. I opened my laptop and showed her the contents of the USB drive. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the files, her expression shifting from shock to grim satisfaction. He knew, she whispered, a mix of sadness and relief in her voice. Your father knew. This is a bomb, Alex. This is everything. We spent the next few hours formulating a plan. We couldn't just go to the authorities yet. Victor had friends in high places. He could spin a story, delay investigations, and use his lawyers to tie everything up in knots for years. We needed a stage, a moment where he felt most invincible, where the truth would have the maximum impact. We both knew the perfect venue, the annual shareholder meeting. It was in 2 weeks. Victor turned it into a glitzy, self-congratulatory gala every year, a celebration of his own genius. He would be on stage, boasting about his leadership, surrounded by investors and press. It was the perfect place to tear his world down. "We need to get this evidence into the presentation," Maya said, her mind already working strategically. "He controls the slide deck, but I still have admin access to the server. If we can swap a file or embed our evidence into his presentation." The plan was audacious, risky, but it was also poetic. He would be exposing himself without even knowing it. We would use his own vanity, his own spectacle, as the instrument of his destruction. For the first time since my father died, I felt a sense of clear, cold purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about finishing what my father had started. The next 2 weeks were a blur of clandestine preparation. Maya and I became digital ghosts, working from remote locations, communicating through encrypted apps. We meticulously organized the evidence from the USB drive into a powerful, simple-to-understand presentation. We didn't need flair. We needed brutal, undeniable clarity. Slide 1, a photo of Victor and my father, smiling. Slide 2, the bank statement showing a multi-million-dollar transfer to VH Holdings. Slide 3, the side-by-side comparison of the original and amended operating agreements. Slide 4, a screenshot of a damning email. We titled the file sh_shareholder_update_final, knowing Victor's presentation was usually named VH_shareholder_update. The day before the meeting, Maya went into the office early. With her level of access, she navigated to the server folder for the event. Victor's presentation was already there. She downloaded it, and with painstaking care, she embedded our entire evidentiary presentation into his, hyperlinking it to a seemingly innocent graphic on one of his later slides. It was a digital trapdoor. To anyone glancing, it was his presentation. But with one click, the entire screen would fill with his crimes. She then deleted the original file and uploaded our modified version, giving it the exact same name as his. It was a dangerous gamble. If anyone checked the file properties or size, they might notice. But we were counting on the chaos of the event day and Victor's monumental ego. He would never double-check his own work. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I went over every possible scenario in my head. What if the tech person didn't click the graphic? What if Victor decided to skip that slide? What if Maya's access was revoked? The doubts were like rats gnawing at my confidence. But then I'd remember the cold finality in Victor's voice when he called me kid, and the resolve would harden inside me again. This was the only way. The day of the shareholder meeting dawned bright and clear. I put on my best suit, the one I'd bought for my first day at my father's company. It felt like a lifetime ago. I looked at myself in the mirror. The grief-stricken, uncertain boy was gone. In his place was a man with a mission, his eyes hard and his jaw set. I felt a strange pre-battle calm. The storm was coming, and I was the one who would let it loose. The meeting was held in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel. It was packed. Shareholders, employees, journalists. Victor loved an audience. I stood at the very back, partially hidden by a pillar. The air was thick with anticipation and the low hum of conversation. Then, the lights dimmed and spotlights hit the stage. Victor walked out to a wave of applause, smiling and waving like a politician. He looked invincible. He stood at the podium, the massive screen behind him glowing with the company logo. "Welcome," he boomed, his voice echoing through the room. "Welcome to a celebration of our incredible success." He began his presentation, clicking through slides filled with soaring graphs and glossy photos of completed projects. He talked about record profits and visionary leadership. He even had the gall to mention my father. "We stand on the shoulders of our founder, James Miller," he said, his voice dripping with false sentiment. "A great man with a great heart. We carry his spirit forward with every project." The hypocrisy was so thick, I could barely breathe. I watched, my body tense, waiting for the right moment. He was nearing the end of his presentation, building to his grand finale about the company's bright future. It was time. I began to walk. I moved away from my pillar and started down the long, central aisle of the ballroom. A few people turned to look at me, their expressions curious. Then a few more. A whisper rippled through the crowd. Victor, sensing a shift in the audience's attention, paused his speech and looked up from his notes. His eyes found me, and for a split second, I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated shock, quickly masked by a condescending smile. "Alex," he said into the microphone, forcing a jovial tone. "What a surprise. I'm glad you could join us to see how well we're doing." I didn't return his smile. I didn't break my stride. I walked right up to the steps of the stage and looked up at him. The room was utterly silent, every eye fixed on us. "Funny you should mention how well we're doing, Victor," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the hushed room. "And funny you should mention my father's spirit." I turned to the young, nervous-looking tech person operating the slides at the side of the stage. "Could you please click on the blue bar graph on the current slide?" I instructed. The tech guy looked frantically at Victor. Victor's smile was frozen in place, but his eyes were wide with panic. "That won't be necessary," Victor snapped, trying to regain control. "We're sticking to the script." "I insist," I said, my voice still calm, but leaving no room for argument. "Click it." Confused, the tech guy clicked the graphic. The screen behind Victor flickered, and his profit chart vanished. In its place was the first slide of our presentation, the photo of him and my father smiling together. A confused murmur ran through the crowd. "That's a nice picture," I said, addressing the audience now, turning my back on Victor. "It represents trust, a trust that was profoundly broken." I nodded to the tech guy. "Next slide, please." He clicked. The bank statement showing the multi-million-dollar transfer to VH Holdings filled the giant screen. The murmur in the room grew louder. I heard sharp intakes of breath. "What is this?" Victor hissed from behind me, his voice low and venomous. "Turn it off. This is nonsense." "Next slide," I said, ignoring him. The side-by-side comparison of the operating agreements appeared. I highlighted the amended clauses in red. "These changes," I said, my voice growing stronger, "were made without my father's knowledge or consent. They were designed to steal legal control of this company from his family." The room was in an uproar. People were standing up, pointing at the screen. Cameras were flashing. Victor was shouting at the tech guy, but Maya, from the back of the room, had already taken remote control of the presentation. She advanced the slides, one after another, each more damning than the last. The damning emails. The property deeds for offshore villas. The voice recording of my father confronting Victor began to play, his tired, betrayed voice echoing through the grand ballroom. The crowd's noise reached a fever pitch. Victor stood frozen on the stage, his face a ghostly white mask of horror. He was exposed, utterly and completely. The carefully constructed image of the shrewd, successful businessman had shattered, revealing the greedy, treacherous thief underneath. He looked out at the sea of angry, shocked faces, and he had nothing left to say. His kingdom was crumbling into dust in real time, and everyone was watching. I turned to face him one last time. The man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, now looked small and shrunken. The spotlight that had once celebrated him now felt like an interrogator's lamp. "You didn't just steal from me, Victor," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact, and its quiet intensity made the crowd hush to listen. "You stole from my father. You stole from every single employee in this company who works hard every day. You stole from every shareholder who believed in you. You didn't just take money, you betrayed a legacy." I didn't wait for a response. I had said everything I needed to say. I stepped down from the stage and walked back up the same aisle I had come down. This time, the silence was different. It wasn't curious. It was stunned, respectful. People watched me go, some with mouths agape, others with slow, understanding nods. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the rest. I could hear the sound of Victor's world collapsing behind me. The shouts, the questions, the calls for security and lawyers. I pushed open the heavy ballroom doors and stepped out into the quiet hallway. The silence was deafening. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It was over. I hadn't raised a fist. I hadn't fired a shot. I had simply told the truth, and the truth had been a weapon more powerful than any I could have imagined. The fallout was immediate and merciless. By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up with calls and messages. The story was already all over the business news channels. Boardroom coup. Founder's son exposes massive fraud. Miller construction partner accused of embezzlement. Video clips from the shareholder meeting were going viral. Victor was removed as CEO and from the board of directors before the sun went down that day. The board, desperate to save whatever was left of the company's reputation, issued a statement condemning his actions and pledging full cooperation with authorities. The evidence from a USB drive was so comprehensive and irrefutable that Victor had no leg to stand on. The police and the Securities and Exchange Commission launched investigations that moved with startling speed. His assets were frozen. His friends in high places vanished, wanting no part of the scandal. The man who had told me I didn't understand how business worked was now facing a future of criminal trials, financial ruin, and almost certain prison time. The justice he faced wasn't delivered by my hand, but by the cold, impartial weight of the law, triggered by the evidence I had revealed. The board, now led by its few remaining original members, called me. They were panicked, apologetic. They begged me to come back and take control of Miller Construction, to save the company from collapse. They offered me my father's old office, the CEO title, everything. I listened to their pleas, their voices full of regret for not seeing the sign sooner. But as I listened, I knew my answer. I couldn't go back. The company my father built was gone. Its name was now synonymous with scandal and betrayal. The spirit of the place, the culture of trust and integrity, had been poisoned by Victor. To go back would be to spend years trying to scrub his stain from the walls, fighting against a tide of bad press and broken trust. I didn't want to salvage his mess. I wanted to build something new, something that was purely my father's and now mine. I declined the board's offer. Instead, using the funds that were rightfully returned to my family from Victor's seized assets, I started a new company. I called it Legacy Builders. The name was a direct tribute to my father and a statement of intent. Our mission would be to build with the quality, integrity, and heart that he had always championed. The first project I announced was Havenbrook, the sustainable, affordable housing community he had dreamed of, the one Victor had called a pipe dream. We broke ground on the very same land my father had chosen years ago. As I stood there, shovel in hand, turning the earth, it felt like a circle was finally closing. I was not just building houses, I was building my father's dream, and in doing so, I was honoring his legacy in the truest way possible. The first person I hired was Maya. I asked her to be my chief operating officer. She had been my eyes and ears, my co-conspirator, and my rock when I had nothing left. She had taken immense risks for me and for my father's memory. She accepted the position without hesitation, a genuine, proud smile on her face. "Your father would be so proud, Alex," she said, and I knew she meant it. Together, we began to rebuild. We reached out to the good, honest people who had left Miller Construction because of Victor's toxic culture. We offered them a place where their work would be valued and their integrity would be rewarded. Our new office was smaller, but it was filled with light and a sense of shared purpose. The cold, profit-driven atmosphere was replaced by the warm, collaborative spirit I remembered from my childhood. My mother, once she understood the full scope of Victor's betrayal, was heartbroken, but her pride in what I had accomplished was a balm to both of us. She told me, with tears in her eyes, that I had become the man my father always knew I would be. I framed my favorite photograph of my dad and placed it on my desk at Legacy Builders. It was a candid shot of him on a construction site, hard hat on, laughing at something one of his crew had said. He looked happy, fulfilled. I looked at it every day while I worked. I finally understood the full meaning of the lessons he had tried to teach me. He always said, "Power doesn't change people, Alex. It reveals them." Victor had always been greedy and selfish. Being given control of the company simply gave him the opportunity to reveal his true nature to the world. He also taught me that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. I hadn't won by shouting back at Victor, by engaging in a dirty, underhanded war of threats and lies. I had won by being patient, by being smarter, and by trusting in the truth my father had preserved. I didn't defeat Victor. I allowed him to defeat himself with the weight of his own crimes. I hadn't reclaimed my father's company, but I had reclaimed something far more important: his mission, his honor, and the future he had always envisioned for me. About a year after Legacy Builders was founded, I was visiting the Havenbrook site. The foundations were laid, and the frames of the first houses were going up. It was a bright, sunny day, and the site was bustling with activity. I saw a young man, a new architect we'd hired, passionately explaining a design detail to one of the foremen. He was enthusiastic, his ideas fresh and a little idealistic. One of the older project managers shot me a look, a raised eyebrow that seemed to say, "Asterisk, this kid is so sentimental." Asterisk, I walked over to them. The young architect looked nervous, expecting to be shut down. I clapped him on the shoulder. "That's a great idea," I said. "Let's see how we can make it work." My father always said the best ideas often come from a fresh perspective. The look of relief and pride on the young man's face was a reflection of my own from a lifetime ago, but with a different ending. In that moment, I knew the cycle was broken. The culture of my father was not just a memory. It was a living, breathing reality again. We were building more than houses. We were building a future he could be proud of. The story of Victor's downfall became a cautionary tale in the business community. I was sometimes asked to speak about ethics and corporate governance. I always declined the spotlight. This wasn't a story I wanted to be famous for. It was a painful, personal chapter of my life that I had closed. The satisfaction came not from Victor's ruin, but from the success of Legacy Builders. We were winning contracts based on our reputation for quality and fairness. Havenbrook was being hailed as a model for future community development. This was the real victory. Sometimes, people who heard the story would ask me if I felt I had been too easy on Victor. They argued that I should have sued him for every penny, pursued him with a personal vengeance that would have left him with nothing. But I had achieved my goal. I had secured my family's future and my father's legacy. Chasing Victor further would have meant living in that dark, angry place for even longer. It would have meant letting him continue to take up space in my head. By walking away, I had taken my power back completely. His fate was in the hands of the justice system, and that was where it belonged. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I went to the cemetery. I placed a small stone on his headstone, a tradition he'd always liked. I stood there for a long time, the quiet peace of the place settling around me. I updated him on everything, on Mom, on Maya, on the progress at Havenbrook. I told him about the first families who would be moving in soon. I knew he couldn't hear me, but it felt important to say it out loud. I realized then that the greatest gift my father had given me wasn't the company or the money. It was his character. It was his belief in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. It was his meticulous nature that led him to create the just-in-case USB drive. He had equipped me with the moral and practical tools to survive the storm. The company he built with his hands was gone, but the foundation he built in me was stronger than ever. I hadn't just outsmarted Victor. I had finally grown into the man my father had raised me to be. Now, when I look back on that terrible, transformative year, I see it not as a story of betrayal, but as a story of redemption. It was about redeeming my father's name and his vision. It was about redeeming my own sense of self-worth from the ashes of Victor's disrespect. The strange twist is that I'm almost grateful to Victor. His greed forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. His betrayal forced me to step up and become the guardian of my father's legacy. So, I'll leave you with this question, the one people still sometimes debate. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have exposed him so publicly, humiliating him in front of everyone he sought to impress? Or would you have handed the evidence quietly to the police, letting the law take its slow, private course? Was my public spectacle a necessary catharsis? Or was it an act of cruelty that stooped to his level? Was I right to walk away and build something new? Or should I have fought to reclaim the old kingdom? There is no easy answer, but the choice I made let me sleep at night. And in the end, that was all that mattered.